look back to the last 10 years, looking at the origins of GCEP and how did it turn out compared to people expected and so forth. So in this last segment, we want to look to the future. And like Lynn said when he introduced his panel, that this is a panel of friends. So anyway, thanks to all of you for joining us. So what we'll be talking about are grand challenges in the future of energy, and what we're looking to accomplish is to get some advice and insight about those areas of research or those trends that could help us skate to the puck, so to speak. And to join in this conversation, we have Gary Leonard from GE. Gary is our management committee member from GE, and he leads GE's research program in the areas of fluid mechanics, thermal systems, combustion, and mechanical systems. And also joining us are Steve Freilich, our management committee member from DuPont, who's the director of materials science and engineering for DuPont Central Research and Development. Also, two professors from Stanford, Chris Field and Tom Jaramillo, also known to you as our GCEP theme leaders. And then finally, Jason Bloking, a PhD student to my left here, who works on organic solar cells. And he's been one of the most active student representatives, really helping us pull together a lot of programs. So I thought first we would just sort of follow on this theme about trends, and we heard from Doug Musica's talk about megatrends that DuPont has analyzed, and so I wanted to sort of get a similar perspective from Gary, and sort of a GE perspective, sort of looking back to the last 10 years and looking to the future. What are those factors that will really change the energy landscape?
Well, let's start looking back 10 years. Mm-hmm. What are the three really big things that have happened? I think there's one negative and two very positive. The big negative was called Fukushima. So it certainly has put the nuclear industry on its heels. I read the other day it's going to cost Japan about $800 billion in their economy. So that's a big negative. I think it drives home the need for smaller, safer, cheaper nuclear solutions. So that's going to be a trend for the future if nuclear makes it. We've talked a lot about natural gas, unconventional gas. Who would have guessed 10 years ago that in 2012 we're making as much electricity in this country out of natural gas as we are coal? So big positive, huge positive for the country and for the world eventually. And then the third surprise, at least from GE's perspective, is how fast the cost of renewables have come down in the past decade. You know, we hear a lot about photovoltaics recently in the news, but wind's also an interesting story, Sally. Over the last decade, the unsubsidized cost of wind has gone from about 15 cents a kilowatt hour to 5. It really is competitive with coal and gas. And as we look forward, we see a clear path to 4 cents a kilowatt hour, a clear path. Maybe not as clear, but give us 10 or 15 years and we'll be at 3. So wind is going to continue to be big and a disruptor. We're also keenly interested in the future of photovoltaics. Thinking about megatrends for the future, you heard it several times. It's the rising middle class in the developing world. 75% of our equipment for power generation that we're going to ship in the next 20 years, probably the next 100 years, it's going to be for the developing world. And we think that probably means a lot more distributed energy versus big central power stations. I think that's a big trend. You heard another one. You know, the 20th century, the power plants used a lot of water. You know, water scarcity is growing. It's going to continue to grow. So power plants of the future are going to have to be dry. You know, another big one, I don't know, if any of you have traveled to Shanghai or Bangalore or Beijing and you get out of the plane, your eyes start to burn. I mean, you know, we build jet engines. They don't last as long flying in those environments. People don't last as long. as long in those environments either. It's a huge health issue. So I think there's going to be a big demand to clean air. I think, and then natural gas. You know, it's big in the U.S. It's growing. We think the industry is going to find a way to make it extremely clean and sustainable as far as you know, water cleanliness and fugitive emissions and stuff. And we think that technology is going to move around the world. So I think those are the big things.
Okay, thanks. So to shift perspectives on megatrends, maybe Tom, you could speak to some of the sort of what you see as megatrends in the materials science and chemical engineering. You know, obviously a revolution is taking place, but if you could say a little bit more about how you see these playing out, and how can we use that to inform what GCEP should be focusing on?
Yeah, I think one of the megatrends, there's three major megatrends as I see them. Number one, I would say, is the advances in theory. And we've seen some of the talks through this presentation, through GCEP, through this conference, that really theory has come a long way in the past even 10 years, but certainly if you look back at the past 30, 40, 50 years, I heard from a very, very famous theoretician not too long ago who mentioned, you know, when he was doing theory in the 1970s, that they were happy just to get the sign right, positive or negative. And obviously nowadays we have just tremendous methods, and it's not about computing power. That certainly helps. Obviously Moore's law and faster computers and all that, that's all wonderful, but that's really nothing if you don't have a good model. And I think we're really starting as a scientific community to understand materials chemistry at interfaces in the bulk of materials, how to control those properties at a very atomistic and quantum level. And with that type of theory and the computing power, you add that together, and really it's exciting what we can be doing in the future. And the ultimate goal is predictive power in theory, to say, I need a material that does X. What is the material that's going to get me there, and have the computer basically figure that out for you. And we're not there yet. We're at the point where you can construct a material and say, what are its properties, and go the other way. But you know, that's what I see, you know, that's a mega trend in the future is theory. Another thing is really the advances in nanoscience and the tools that we have today that didn't exist even when I was doing my PhD, and certainly further back. And you look at transmission electron microscopy, and you want to understand materials at the atomic level. This is the workhorse tool that people utilize. And we're at the point where we've really hit the resolution limits on what TEM can do. And that's amazing. We can see atoms, and that's becoming more and more routine these days. The new challenges in TEM are now, for instance, still getting that atomic resolution during in situ conditions, operating at 600 degrees C and at you know, 10 torr pressure, for instance, and going higher and beyond that. So I think there's still a frontier there, but the tools are amazing, allowing us to do the things that we couldn't do before. And the third thing I would say is team-based science. And that's a mega trend where, thanks to centers like GCEP, bringing researchers together and serving as a model for that. This is propagating throughout the sciences. And it's clear that we all bring our different expertise to the table, and where we're getting better at working together and finding avenues where we can be synergistic and go beyond what we could do as single PIs. And that's not just from a perspective of bringing centers together, but also just more collaboration, more interaction. We have an internet now where we can find literature at the drop of a hat instead of having to dig in a library. These sorts of things, it's just getting that much easier to access information. And so that propagates too. So a lot of the great ideas that we've seen in the conference here came from other fields that might not have been so easily accessible. So, but basically working as teams and solving big problems, I think, is a mega trend.
Okay, great, thanks. So Jason, you know, you're at a kind of different stage of life. You're a graduate student. You're just getting ready to start your career, and you know, looking to the future. You know, what are your biggest hopes and fears and trends that you see? We'd really appreciate your perspective.
Sure. So one of my biggest hopes, I guess, and one of the most exciting things that I've seen is that the kind of enthusiasm and the focus amongst students like myself, other graduate students, other undergraduates, in kind of tackling such a big, complex problem such as global climate change, clean energy, renewable energy from a variety of different areas is really kind of encouraging. So I think it doesn't go, you don't have to go very far before you find a student who says, I want to do something related to clean energy, or I want to do something to, work on sustainability or recycling or anything. So I think I even looked up today and found that there are at least 14 student clubs, student-run at Stanford whose main goal is sustainability or clean energy or anything like that, and that spreads across the different schools that are available. So the enthusiasm that students have towards tackling such a problem like this is really kind of encouraging on one side. But on the kind of fear side, I don't want to get too negative, but I guess there are a couple things that related to some of the trends that have already been discussed that I think are major issues that could kind of play out over I guess the next few decades or less. Is that I know in the 1970s during the oil embargo, I guess I wasn't around, but I've been told several times that there was a large focus on driving new scientific research into renewable energy resources because we didn't have a large supply of oil, and that was kind of critical to our nation's economy, national security, things like that. And after a few years, when the price of oil essentially came down, the focus and continuing into these renewable energy areas died along with it. And the 80s and the 90s were a period where there wasn't as much research. And currently in the 2000s, now in the 2010s, we've seen such a rise in research towards renewable energy. I would kind of be worried if something as strong as much as a boon of discovering these large natural gas resources in the U.S. are to our national economy, whether that doesn't kind of shift our attention away from these other renewable energy resources, which hopefully don't kind of suffer the dearth of enthusiasm going forward. So that's one of kind of the key fears that I have. And then another one that was already mentioned also was the large amount of urbanization and development that's going to go on in much of the developing world, and trying to provide the amounts of energy in hopefully more clean and renewable and sustainable ways for such a large population, to not deny this large population of some of the benefits that we had by kind of growing dirty, but to do so in kind of a much more sustainable way. That's one thing I think that also, I guess saying a fear is a strong word, but keeps us thinking.
Okay, all right, great. Okay, so we've sort of laid out what some of the challenges are, and now I want to shift the attention to our ability to meet these challenges. And Chris, you're the leader of the Working Group 2 of the IPCC, and Working Group 2 focuses on climate change impacts, adaptation, and vulnerabilities. And you're well aware of many of the energy challenges we face. What's your our assessment of our ability to deal with these? What do we need to do?
I thought I was the janitor. I didn't know I was the leader. I think that there is a really new focus on understanding what climate change means for individuals, for societies, and for nations in the world. We used to think of climate change very much in terms of average conditions, in terms of distributed impacts, and I think it's clear now that dealing with climate change is almost entirely about managing risks that are hard to pin down in detail, risks that are differentiated dramatically depending on what part of the world you're in, and risks that will in many cases play out on a timetable that's A, difficult to predict, and B, will lead to almost certainly quite profound impacts before mitigation has a chance to kick in. I think that in terms of the solution set, there are two things that are really clear and really important. One is that for a long time we thought about adaptation and mitigation as really separate things. I think it's clear now that adaptation, dealing with the climate changes that can't be avoided, mitigation, limiting the climate change that can be avoided, and sustainable development, providing technologies that meet the legitimate aspirations of the world's people, are all different sides of one coin. And when we think about dealing with the climate problem, we really need to think about it as deeply integrated into the problem of international development. But I think we also recognize that no matter how aggressive we are here, that progress on climate hasn't been as comprehensive or sustained or as broad-based as it really needs to be. We're working our way out of a hole, and it's a hole that, as a consequence of the slow start internationally, not to say anything against the spectacular efforts that have occurred within GCEP and the sponsor companies, that there are going to be a wide range of impacts that are going to have consequences for a lot of the strategies that we're talking about deploying, strategies that involve biomass energy, that involve wind and water resources. And I think we need to start building the unavoidable climate change into the energy systems that we're talking about.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, thank you. So Steve, DuPont's been working on mega trends and understanding these, and you work in the materials area. What's your assessment of how prepared we are to meet these challenges that are in the energy system? Even just the sheer daunting thing, we probably need twice as much energy to provide everyone with some reasonable standard. How prepared are we to deal with that?
It's actually a pretty difficult question to answer, because you're talking about a challenge that's truly global in nature, probably the single largest problem that humanity has ever faced. And yet the solution, as Chris says, is really regional. And it's that the marriage of regional opportunities with the global challenge and then local policy, as Kathy was pointing out, that's really going to determine how prepared we truly are. And I think if we just sort of step back and try not to look at this in the truly global nature and just think about some of the things that are happening in, say, the EU, where they have been able to find that great marriage with policy and opportunity. In Asia, in many cases in Asia, you have the same thing. In the US, though, we seem to be having more of a distributed solution to this, while we try to work out the fundamental issue of energy security and the alternative position being environmental stewardship. And we don't have to have those as disparate answers, but somehow in our political dialogue, as I'm sure if Kathy were here, she would say something along these lines as well. In the political dialogue, we have found those as separate answers, and bringing them together is what's really going to drive the public-private partnership that's required. Because if you think about the energy landscape, there's probably no entrenched infrastructure that is quite as firm as the current energy, the energy infrastructure that exists globally. Even to the point where there are government regulations that say that the commodity that comes out, being the electron, has to be the lowest cost possible. So the government plays an incredibly important role here in being able to establish some of these technologies in a firm footing, allow them to stand on their own 2 feet, making sure that some of the challenges in scale up and in intellectual property management for a commodity can actually be dealt with. And so now I want to help Jason feel a little better here. This is part of my job, and I promised to look after him the best I could at our lunch yesterday. I don't think your worry about the previous energy crisis and then dissipating is one you have to deal with anymore. Because now we are dealing with renewables as a viable industry. And getting back to the point of some of the things that the EU has done, we often think about policy and government as being involved in subsidies. But the reality is probably the single largest thing that the government can do in helping the renewable industries is by establishing a base load, establishing some consistency of thought in a regional basis. So banks are willing to loan because they understand that this is something that the government is behind. And we're in a position where the supply chain can actually get efficient. There's an amazing statistic here. This is going to make you feel really good. The cost of putting a PV module up in Germany, installing it, is substantially cheaper than it is in the US. You would think that the labor costs in Germany would actually make it the exact opposite. But it's the experience that the installers have and the supply chain that now is much more efficient because the government has put its effort behind it that really makes this a viable thing. And I think I may have my statistics wrong, and somebody in the audience can correct me if I am wrong on it. But I think in Germany, renewables now account for about 20% of the total energy load, energy supply. And now we're heading into another problem in Germany, which is the stability of the grid that we heard a little bit about, because they're getting to the point where that's starting to be a challenge. That's a good thing, right, Jason?
That is a good thing.
Did I help at all?
Definitely.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Now, before I go on,
Okay.
can I make one other
course,
comment here? As we think about the big challenges, I want to make sure that we roll into the room what I consider to be the single largest challenge that we're facing. And that is that we need to have renewable energy be both affordable and profitable. And right now, today, we're running a very interesting experiment where, at least in photovoltaics, we have one of them, but not the other.
Right.
We've got cheap, but we don't have profitable. And if you don't have profitable, you don't have innovation. And if you don't have innovation, people cut corners to get their costs down, try to get their reinvestment economics up. And now you've got yourself a real challenge for the industry. So we got to figure out how to do the kinds of things that GCEP does to be able to convert this low-cost system to also a profitable thing. And that's going to be new science and new technology.
Okay, great. Okay, talking about technology and meeting challenges, and GCEP sort of looks in the 10 to 50-year time frame. And Gary, from your perspective, what are going to be the biggest game changers? And if you could wave a wand and have 3 new technologies, what would they be?
Well, that's a really hard question, Sally. Thanks.
Sorry.
So I've been thinking about this week, right? So the first one would be in the power sector, and it would be the most impactful, hardest thing, right? And that's low-cost carbon capture and storage.
Okay.
You think about China, when their economy is booming. Just a couple years ago, they're spending $100 billion a year building new coal-fired power plants. Things are a little slower. They're only spending $50 billion a year. And they're going to continue, China and India and the developing world is going to continue to do this for the next 20, 30 years. And those plants are going to run for the next 70 years. So we've got a lot of emissions, carbon emissions coming out of the built infrastructure. And somehow or another, we've got to figure out how to get our arms around that. That's a really hard one. So low-cost carbon.
Okay.
I'll put the second one in the transportation sector. Wouldn't it be really cool to have batteries that cost about 1/5 what they do today, and we're really flexible and durable, so we could use them also to back up the grid to take care of some of the grid things? I think that would be a real game changer. And again, I understand a really hard problem, but that would be my second. The third, can I make it a policy one versus a technology?
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Thanks. Yep. I would really like to see more government funding of very fundamental research in the energy space. I think we're significantly underfunding. The companies in this room can help do a GCEP, but the government could help do 100 GCEPs.
Right.
And we did that. I'm sure we'd get after those 2 big problems in a lot faster and more impressive way. So that would be my third.
Okay, all right, great. So Tom, same question. Wave your wand. What are your 3
It's a dangerous wand to
technologies?
wave.
Yeah.
I think, so I think the first things that you mentioned there out of your mouth were cost effective or low cost. And I think if you could do that with any technology, we basically have solutions. And there's so many ways to do this, whether it's photovoltaics, batteries, geothermal, carbon capture storage. Any of these technologies, if you make them cheap enough that they can actually beat fossil fuels, as long as they're renewable and they're clean tech, they should do the trick. I think that we do need a portfolio of different technologies depending on which region of the world you're at, but really that's the key point. So the wand is the cost effectiveness wand, right? And you could just point it in so many directions and it would work. But I think if I were to be another way to answer this question is I'm very fond of technologies that are already at scale today and that are deployed and used. And that's why I personally am a big fan of fuels, because this is what we use every single day. And we use hydrocarbons left and right. And so, if we were, if I could wave a wand of cost effectiveness, I think direct air capture of CO2 to then be recycled into fuels like hydrocarbons, to then be used in fuel cell devices that, or some form of device that can take, it could be an internal combustion engine because you've got direct air capture anyway, but if you want to be more efficient, a fuel cell that takes those hydrocarbons and gets the energy back out. Now we've got no net emissions of CO2, and we have cars that are quiet and cars that go really long distances because they run on fuels. And we're grabbing the CO2 from the air, and so a scheme like that, if we're going to be waving magic wands, I think that would be really nice. But this concept can be really applied across the board to so many different renewable technologies. Just two more things I'll just mention. One thing is you could solve a lot of problems with a magic wand if you could just create low-cost teleportation. And save 25% of the world's energy just by teleporting people, teleporting goods and products and water and things. I think that would do a lot of good, but of course, I don't know.
I think we'd need to ask the sponsors about whether they thought it was a good investment as the teleporting.
Maybe not a winning proposal, but since it's a magic wand. And the other thing is more practical. Actually, I was going to mention was monitoring a way of that people can recognize where their, how their energy consumption is. And when they grab a product, for instance, at a grocery store, you reach for the ice cream, and I love ice cream, but it's going to take so much energy. That took so much energy to keep that thing cold from when it was made. I'm going to store it in my freezer for how long? And if I had a way to kind of just know that in real time, that would change my habits in a very positive way. And so I think ways of allowing for monitoring and giving people the feedback they need, because I think there's a lot of fat that can be trimmed from our energy consumption. And I think that could be a feasible device.
Okay, great. That looking to the future, what would you like to be able to provide and build and manufacture and sell and so forth?
Well, the really cool thing about DuPont in the energy space is that while we've been out of direct supply of energy since we sold Conoco in the late 90s, I do think it's fair to say that most of the major advances in energy have been at the interface of materials and engineering. And that's probably a true statement over the last 50 years or so. Mm-hmm. And as Doug pointed out, our efforts in photovoltaics actually began literally at day one when DuPont was supplying ultra-pure silicon into the solar battery work that was going on at Bell Labs. We were the only company that had the capability of supplying that kind of purity, and we've really kept that up all the way through to the point where the materials that we're supplying now have helped take the cells in photovoltaics from about 12% in 2000, 12% efficiency in 2000, up to 18% in 2012. And there's a lot more headspace to be done in that innovation, but it's always a dangerous question to ask me what I get excited about, because I'm fairly easily excited. And one of the things that I see, which builds on something that we heard in the talk, Michael's talk right before this, is thin film photovoltaics on flexible substrates using earth-abundant materials, which is an incredibly difficult challenge. But if we can do that, what we end up with is the ability now to have very low cost to manufacture, very low energy inputs into the manufacture, and the ability to take the thin film or the PV technology into spaces that we couldn't go into before. And this is all materials and the engineering that's going to support it. So that's one. I absolutely agree with Gary Leonard that energy storage is key. Changing the game, going out of the box in the materials that we have today is going to be really, really important to changing things. And tremendous materials opportunities there, as we heard from Professor Sui. I also have the firm belief that the cheapest, cleanest, and most sustainable energy that there is the energy that you don't use.
Yep.
And fabulous opportunities in all areas of the value chains to do energy conservation, energy efficiency, again, just absolutely enabled by materials. Now, a lot of that stuff exists, and there are all sorts of reasons why it's not being utilized. But there are also wide open spaces for new energy efficiency opportunities that have barely been tapped into yet, and I'm very excited about getting into those.
Okay. All right. So now maybe a little moment for some advice to GCEP and also to the students who are here. And so I'll ask that question of the non-GCEP or staff, so to speak. So maybe Jason, we'll start with you. You know, what advice do you have for us as GCEP? You know, you've been really involved as a student, and also what advice do you have for students who are in the audience in this regard?
Sure. So I thought about what advice I could offer GCEP was kind of, giving me so much as well, in addition to just funding. But I think what GCEP has done over the past 10 years in terms of putting out this really high quality research amongst a wide portfolio of research areas is really the biggest thing that they've been able to do. Just the quality of the research is really incredible. So on that note, I would just say keep it up. That part is really going strongly. But in addition to that, it's really provided an opportunity for so many interdisciplinary collaborations amongst faculty, amongst students, and so we're getting even the academics to talk with the industrialists and to kind of have this collaboration and this kind of cross-contamination of ideas, people thinking about the actual science, people thinking about how can we take the science and commercialize it. And so the kind of private and academic partnership that GCEP has kind of developed has been really kind of definitely the strongest thing that they've been doing. So it's hard to think about how much GCEP could do better, considering they've done so much well already. So hopefully on that respect, I just hope to kind of come back at GCEP in 20 years and see some of the additional things that have just been turned out in the next 10. So that would be my hope for GCEP. And in terms of advice for the students, I see so much enthusiasm and so much focus in amongst the students, and these incredible ideas that are coming from every different area. And so just continue to kind of look for new areas and challenge what's already been put out there. And if somebody says that I don't think that can be done, did you think about this? And you look further into it. That doesn't necessarily mean it's not the place where you could actually make an impact. So there's so many different areas that haven't been explored, I think, as well so far. But I was also inspired by Kathy Zoe's presentation today, in that it gave me an opportunity to think about all the different ways that we can all affect this kind of grand challenge, the different roles that she had in the ecosystem. So, I mean, I had kind of always thought of myself as one of the discoverers. I'm in the trenches trying to design the new technology that maybe could help. But I didn't think of my role as cheerleader or maybe as early adopter or things like that. So there are a variety of different ways where you can actually have a significant impact above and beyond what you're actually doing on the science side. So my advice is to take a look at where you can have additional impacts that you might not be considering right now, because there's a lot of different things that can be done to actually push this whole progress forward. So it's kind of some of my advice to the students.
Okay, great, thanks. So Steve, I think we'll go back to you and ask you. What you're the newcomer here, and what advice do you have for us? I mean, we've been involved for about a year and a half now or so. Is that a little less than that? A little less than that. Okay. So so with a fresh perspective, what advice would you have for us as GCEP and also for the students?
Well, one of the things that I really, really like about what GCEP is doing, and I think it was brought out in Michael and Charlie's talks in the last session, you've done a great job in applying modeling tools to really identify what the key problems are. So you stay out of the trap of going after those things that are expedient, following the crowd, doing the things that everybody else is doing because that's where the publications are, and actually spending your time working on the things that are truly, truly important to solve the real tough problems. I also really like something that lost her name here.
Shannon Miller.
Shannon Miller, thank
right,
you,
yep.
said yesterday. And that was about how she saw what she was doing as science first, technology development second. And I think there is a danger that the students have to avoid in just immediately marching to a technological solution to something without spending their time learning the science and developing the new science, it's going to be critically important. Because if you think about, on the one hand, it's important to get that scientific background in order to be able to get a good job and be flexible in your new employment situation. But think about some of the huge challenges that are out there that are going to require profound understanding of science in order to get us out of where we are today. Things like the fact that we've got massive amounts of waste heat that's being generated. And to solve that problem, where we've already put so much effort into creating the waste heat, we're going to have to do things completely differently. A whole new science has to be developed. A fabulous opportunity for folks at GCEP. We've got the opportunity, we've talked a lot about PV, better light utilization, and being able to reduce some of the tremendous losses that take place from the light to the end of the wire. And whole new science areas need to be developed there. And finally, just going back to something that Professor Johansson said yesterday morning, we've got 1.2 billion people on this planet who do not have access today to electricity. And what that means for them is they're challenged in getting clean water. Challenging clean water means they're challenged in health, and they're trapped in a cycle of poverty. And this is why I think that the science that GCEP does has to be focused on solving problems like that, because the implications of doing that kind of work are way beyond what we get from a publication or institutional value. And we're really saving the world with this. It's more than just important, it's critical. And the foundation of doing this is in new science.
Yeah, you know, and thinking back to yesterday's presentation about Gandhian engineering, you know, I think that that's so relevant too, that solutions that would work well in the developed world might not be the right solutions for the developing world. So, so maybe we can be a little more Gandhian in our approach to these things. So Gary, so you, often have pizza with the students, and with the student, you know, that your pizza lunches are really popular, and but those are usually involved with recruiting and so forth. So I was wondering what advice you would offer to the students here.
Well, I guess first of all, I'd love to trade places with them. You guys are at the right place at the right time for a lot of the reasons Steve just mentioned. You know, fast forward 40 years, you're gonna get to look back and say, you know, you helped take 3 billion people out of poverty into the middle class. That's a big deal. So I'd love to trade places with you. I'm going to build on a little bit what you said, Tom. Right now, your students, you're working on teams, and that's really big. I'd take this opportunity, if I were a student, to study teams and team dynamics. Because what we need, at least what we need in industry, are people that could build great teams and lead great teams. So I would really take this opportunity now as a student working on a team, think about what it is to build a great team and to lead a great team, because you're really needed. And maybe, again, building on Tom, you know, the internet's a wonderful thing. And right now, you guys have a real passion for learning. Never lose it, okay? Leverage the internet every day to build, because what you're an expert in today, 10 years from now, you're going to need to be an expert in something else. So all through your career, just continue to drive yourself to learn. I think those two things are key to any young professional's development and success.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. So GCEP really is a unique partnership, just evidenced by the people in this room. We have people at the R&D organizations. We have senior leaderships from the corporations that are GCEP partners. We have students, we have faculty, we have staff. We have a broad community around us who also participate, our friends in the neighborhood here. And so I think about this unique partnership, and to me, like, if you change the way you think about something, then you really know that something's touched you. And so we've all experienced this unique partnership for quite a while now. And so Chris, I'll ask you first, how has, you've been involved in climate and energy issues for a long time, but you've been involved with GCEP pretty heavily now for, what, 3-4 years. And how has it changed the way you think about things? And what have you learned that, that surprised you, and what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned because you've been a part of GCEP?
I think the GCEP community is a wonderful resource, but one of the things that is really clear is that GCEP can't do everything. I think that the partnership between academics and industry is powerful and potent, but the problems that we're dealing with have dimensions that require skills in government, that require skills in the NGO sector, and as much as I've gotten a tremendous amount from the GCEP interactions and a deep respect for the passion for the solutions that comes from the community here, one of the things that's been reinforced by my experience, the recognition that we're part of a fabric that needs to be bigger, and we need to recognize that the solution space is one where we can build important parts, but where we can't build the whole thing. And I also think that it's one of the things that's most exciting for me to think about in GCEP, and I've gotten a ton of good ideas, is how you identify targets of opportunity that are going to be big 10, 20, 30 years in the future. It's real easy to say, what's the next big hurdle in increasing the efficiency of something? I mean, it may be hard to solve, but there are lots of important steps that are incremental. And I think one of the exciting things about my GCEP experience is that a lot of the conversations have been not what's the solution to the next incremental problem, what's the next problem that we haven't even thought about. And that's where I think the creativity and the unique mix that comes from the kind of community we've gathered here can really pay off.
Okay. All right, and Gary, I'm going to put you on the spot one more time. GE's a big, sophisticated, been in the energy industry since the beginning of time, and not quite, but so how has GCEP changed the way that you think about these issues?
It's, I think in many ways, GCEP created a forum where we brought groups like ExxonMobil and DuPont, Schlumberger, Toyota, GE together, along with 40 universities. That wouldn't happen without GCEP. And every day, I think, any decision I make, it's very much colored by what I've learned at GCEP. Chris, you don't know it, but when I pull you aside and I ask you a question about biofuels or something, that's making a big impact, and I think on what GE does in the biofuels area. I take your message, and
that's scary.
And Lynn, when I want to know something about geophysics, that's not a space GE's strong in. I go to you, or I go to Rama, or somebody like that. Just having access to these people that you trust and are real experts in the field, that's a big deal for GE. I don't think everybody at GE realizes that, but it really is. So I really appreciate Sally and Lynn and what you guys have done, bringing us together in a way that it never would have occurred naturally.
Yeah. Well, we really appreciate you all for bringing us together too. So with that, I think I'd like to open it. We still have a few more minutes. I'd like to open this up to the audience for any questions to anybody.
I wanted to address the issue that Jason is fear that, again, there would be a burst of enthusiasm after, this thing, and then it would fall down like it did last time. So I was there last time, and it was very different last time for two reasons. First thing is that it started by something which was way before 1974. It was in 1960s, in the 60s, there was this thing called the Club of Rome, who had put out a report saying that it was called The Limit to Growth. And by the way, the book is still out there. And if you read it, it's an absolutely fascinating thing to read. And in the book, it basically said we're going to run out of everything within 20 years. So for example, the oil production would have been zero in 1985. Okay, so maybe you were not born then, right? Okay. Oh, no, maybe you were. So this idea, and then when the crisis hit in 74, the embargo and the price went up, people said, aha, but this is going to happen very soon and we cannot afford it. And so it was based on scarcity of the resource, if you want. And what we've learned is that actually in the oil and gas business, and even in coal is the same thing, is that the resource is actually very large. It's finite, of course, but it's very large, okay? And therefore there is much more, so the ingenuity of people is so much that you can always sort of improve and you do much better than you thought you would do before. But the big difference with 1974 is in the title of GCEP. It's climate. In 1974, the climate worry almost didn't exist. There were a few people, Roger Revel and a few others who were worried about this and, had computed that something could happen one day. But in the, I would say, in the general, policy space or in the large companies, this was not at all the case. And I think the climate is going to stay with us for a very long time. CO2 concentration continue to rise 2 ppm a year every year. And if anything, is going to go faster in the next 10 years than it has in the last 10 years. So I think this is the big difference which makes me feel that your fear is not founded.
That's a very, very good point, and I know that's a much different consideration right now than it was back in the 70s. So, of course, as time goes on, the evidence that just building and building that the climate is becoming more and more of an issue. Eventually, it will sink into the people where it matters the most, I imagine. So.
Yeah, please.
So I want to ask a question that really reflects my feeling that what many have said, that facing the problems in the developing world is an absolutely essential part of this challenge, and it's one that I think that we in GCEP have not done as well as we would like to have done. So my question is, how should we approach that? How do we engage the countries that have these big challenges, but in a way that recognizes that what our strength is dealing with the fundamentals of the science and in the engineering science. So I mean, I'm truly asking this as a question because I think I've demonstrated that I don't know how to do this. So can you offer any advice?
Go ahead, Steve.
I'll take a swing at it. I think it's going to require some very different business models. From my perspective, a lot of the wrangling at the various climate symposia have dealt with the question of whether it needs to be the developing economies or the developed economies that have to do it. And I think the answer is that everybody has to own the problem. And if we look at it that way, then I think we can start thinking about different business models where the technology being developed in the developed economies is then transferred to the developing economies, recognizing the fundamental differences and helping them then build up the capability to do the things that they need to do in order to have their GDP and their purchasing parity expand the way they have an entitlement to, and at the same time keeping their energy consumption up without the negative impact. So it's got to start with this, with the recognition that the global nature of it requires us to think differently about the business of energy.
Can I add one quick point?
Sure.
I think that probably the most important thing is to recognize that it's not a technology problem. It's a global societal problem, recognition that we're all in this together and that we've got to come up with solutions that recognize the shared responsibility and come up with a way to deal with it that stakeholders across the spectrum can view as equitable.
I'd like to add one kind of practical shovel-ready idea on how to implement something like this in GCEP, and that is, I think a researcher like myself, from the researcher perspective, I could certainly, based on the conference, I can come up off the top of my head some interesting avenues to pursue along those lines of research. I can read about it, come up with some more ideas, but I think what would be really helpful is if GCEP were to sponsor an activity where experts in this area could kind of agree on the hit list of the top technological challenges specifically for the developing world that need to be addressed. And then that list can be put out to the researchers and allow us to say, okay, because instead of me making that value judgment as to what they really need, it would be nice if experts who really were knowledgeable in that could tell me what the big technical challenges are, and then let my team and I kind of work to brainstorm how to address them. Yeah. So that would be helpful.
So what in hearing all this, it seems to me that I think I know the topic of our next workshop. And it really would be, get like you say, the experts in the room from India, from China, from other places where Africa, and really figure out if we could do X, Y, and Z, where we could imagine waving our wand, what would it be? And then look at those things that make sense for us to work on. I think that would be a great addition to the way we think about these issues. So. Well, with this, I think we need to end the panel because we're ready to move to the final part of the program. So thank the panel very much and appreciate it.